I've gone through a roller coaster of emotions with Mako at Seaworld Orlando. So if you didn't know, I'm from Southern California, so I'm a local to Seaworld San Diego, but I have gotten to go to Seaworld Orlando 3 different times over a few years. My first visit was in 2020, I returned the next year in 2021, and most recently in the summer of 2024. So I've had multiple laps on Mako, 15 to be exact. Some of them I walked away pretty underwhelmed, and others I walked away thinking it's one of the best roller coasters I have ever ridden. So today I want to dive into the highs and the lows of Mako. I've talked a lot about it on this channel, but my favorite roller coaster of all time is Diamondback at Kings Island, which is of course a B&M hypercoaster. But Mako is also a B&M hypercoaster, and unlike Diamondback, Mako is highly regarded as one of the best, if not the best, B&M hypers. So when I first got to Mako in 2020, I had my expectations set sky high. It was completely unreasonable. I only got 3 laps that day in 2020. My first ever ride on Mako was in a middle seat and it was stapled, so I walked away really disappointed with that. By the end of the day, I thought it was a front row ride, which I completely disagree with now, which is just funny. In 2021, I got 6 rides, and in 2024, I also got 6. So let's dig into this ride experience. I really love how this coaster is positioned along the lake for SeaWorld Orlando. When you're driving by the park, it acts as a great billboard. The thing is though, when you're inside the park, it can be really difficult to get views of Mako, so that's a little disappointing, but it's not the biggest deal in the world. And because of its position in the park, the entrance is kind of far away from the station building, so you kind of have to make a trek back there, which kind of adds to the mystique of the attraction, and I feel like they do a really great job of presentation. It looks really nice. Like the station is like a sunken ship that's been bitten into by a Mako shark, and there's a lot of coverings for the queue area so you can wait in the shade, which is very nice. They do have screens on the roof of the station, so when a train dispatches, a bunch of sharks like swim off in the same direction that the train is moving. I think I've only seen it work once though. I think it was 2021 when it was working. In 2020 and 2024 it was not working, so that's kind of a shame. I imagine that effect would be better at night too. I've not gotten a night ride on Mako, but I got a pretty late sunset ride this past year, so that was really cool. As I mentioned, my favorite restraints of all time are these B&M clamshells, so Mako's restraints are absolutely incredible. It takes like 0 effort to hold them up, and it provides enough airtime room for you. And unlike the Cedar Fair hypercoasters that I've ridden, Mako does not have a seatbelt, so that saves time with operations. After you dispatch, you're gonna roll up that lift hill. You have a great view of Kraken on your left hand side and obviously the water below you. And this first drop is really solid. Obviously more so towards the back of the train. In the front row, you don't really get much airtime. When you're about halfway down the drop, you start floating up just a little bit, but by that point you're pretty much in the valley, so very light airtime in the front row, and it's not that sustained. And obviously pretty much every drop ever is better in the back, and that is the case with every B&M hyper, including Mako. Funny story that I have is that before my rides on Mako in 2024, the last B&M hyper that I got to ride was Apollo's Chariot in 2022, so it had been a long time since I'd been on a B&M hyper, and my first ride this year was in the back row of Mako with a decent amount of airtime room, so I got thrown out of my seat on the drop, and it kind of floored me. It kind of felt like I was gonna fly out of my seat, you know? So like I was just admiring the view. I was excited to be back on a B&M hyper because I love this ride model so much. So I just wasn't mentally prepared for how awesome that airtime room was gonna be, especially in the back with a decent amount of airtime room. So the valley of Mako is a little strange because most coasters have like a very generic valley that's like proportional and U-shaped, but for whatever reason Mako's valley, it like flattens out, and so you go through a section of straight track just for like a very brief moment, and then you start up into the first element on the attraction. So that's a little weird. Like Diamondback and Thunderstriker both have U-shaped valleys, so it's just a little bizarre that Mako's has straight track. But that being said, it's not that big a deal. You don't even notice it on the ride because you're traveling so fast. Then you're gonna fly up into this first turn, which is pretty generic. It's probably one of the weakest parts of the ride. There's not that much forces. Obviously there's no airtime. I prefer the turning element on Thunder Striker over this element on Mako, because there's no airtime on any row. You might get like a light burst of laterals towards the top of it, but that's about it. So it's really not noteworthy. And then you're thrown into this amazing camelback. It's basically 5 seconds of very sustained floater airtime. It's so much fun. This might be an unpopular opinion, but I think this element is better in the front row than in the back row. When you're in the back row, you're gonna start getting airtime before you crest the hill, and then you're gonna fly out of your seat all the way back down into the valley. In the front row, obviously, you start floating out of your seat much sooner. And for most B&M hypers in the front row of a camelback, you're gonna like land back in your seat as for the second half of the element. But for Mako, it keeps you out of your seat all the way down back into the valley. So it feels much more sustained in the front row, which is really crazy. But it's still obviously a spectacular moment in the very back. It's just so much fun. It's so surreal. This is probably one of the most sustained airtime moments I've ever experienced in my entire life, and I absolutely love sustained airtime and floater airtime. So this element is probably one of my favorite of all time. I love this hill. After that, you're gonna hit another turnaround. This one's pretty generic, literally like no forces. Then you're gonna hit a second camelback. This one has a trim, but it's not that big a deal. I don't mind trims personally, and you still get that awesome floating sensation. But I do think that this hill in particular is probably better in the back. I think the first hill might be the only element on this ride that's better in the front row, which is why this ride is a back row ride overall, because even though the best element is best in the front, every other element is best in the back. So that's obviously another great hill. Then you're thrown up into another hill. This one's a little disappointing because you curve out of it in the second half, so the airtime is hindered in both the front and the back row, especially the back. So it's too bad that they didn't have the space to cram in a second full hill and then have it turn after the valley. But it's really not that big a deal. It's still a fun element. And then you're thrown into the speed hill, which is probably the most powerful moment of airtime on the attraction, but it is not the most sustained. It is very fun. The airtime hits in every single row. It's absolutely spectacular. And because it's such a small hill, the difference between the front and the back isn't that noteworthy, because you get the same strength of airtime pretty much, even in the middle. That being said though, after riding Orion, the speed hill on that ride absolutely crushes the speed hill on Mako. So if you've been on Orion but not Mako, you might be disappointed with this speed hill because it's nowhere near as sustained or as powerful as the speed hill on Orion, but it's still very fun, don't get me wrong. After the speed hill, you're gonna crest up into the mid-course brake run. Something that you should take note of is that you're gonna get airtime, even in the back row you'll get airtime cresting into the mid-course brake run, but the brakes do tap the train, so it can be very weird being out of your seat while the train is slowing down. If you're holding onto the restraint, or if you're letting go of the restraint or grabbing it, like in the process of grabbing it, while you're floating and the train is slowing down, it's very possible to jam your finger. So just be aware of that. Either commit to having your hands up or commit to holding onto the restraint during the mid-course brake run so you don't have that issue. I gotta be real, the second half of Mako is where the ride kind of dies. There's just not much left to unpack for the rest of this layout. Like the drop off the mid-course brake run is twisted so you don't get any airtime. The hill afterwards might be the most disappointing hill on any B&M that I've ever experienced. You get like no airtime. Like in 2021 I said it was a dud element, but this year I remember getting a little airtime, which is way more than my memory of it. So that's just something to be aware of. This is by far the most disappointing hill on the attraction. And then after that, you're gonna fly through 2 overbanks. In 2024, I didn't think they were special at all, but in 2021, I said that the left seat gave airtime during that first bank because it was the highest off the ground, but I did not think that was the case this year. So I don't know if it was just running faster in 2021, Or maybe I was delusional, I don't know. In all 3 years that I got to ride the attraction, the second bank had no airtime, it was just the first one. And then you dive down by the water, that can be a pretty cool visual, and then you crest up into the final brake run. So there's just nothing beyond the mid-course brake run for Mako, and for that reason I feel like that this attraction is a little bit overrated, because it's highly regarded the best B&M hyper in the United States, and I really don't think that's the case. Mako is by far a first half ride. That first half is really good, and it's probably better than the first half on Diamondback, which I rank over Mako. But Diamondback is just a much more complete attraction. Like, Diamondback has 8 really strong airtime moments in my opinion, and Mako has 5 that are like solid moments, and then that final hill might make it 6 depending upon how the ride is running. So in 2024 it had 6 airtime moments. But outside of the speed hill and the first Camelback, the airtime moments on Diamondback are better than the ones on Mako. Plus, you throw in the splashdown. That's a much cooler interaction with the water compared to just turning over water, and I feel like Diamondback's just better. In terms of layout, the only thing that Mako has over Diamondback is the speed hill, which does create a diversity of airtime, so that is cool, and I still really like it. I really love Mako, like that. As I've mentioned multiple times, the first half is absolutely spectacular. It just does not reach the heights of Diamondback, even though most people claim that is way better than Diamondback. So either way, Mako is absolutely my type of ride. I absolutely love this thing. It is my second favorite B&M hyper of the 4 that I have ridden. I do have a review up for Diamondback if you would like to check that out, and of course I made one for Thunderstriker not too long ago. If you enjoyed this video, please check those out. If you want to hear me yap about roller coasters some more. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you for listening. Please like, comment, and subscribe, and I will catch you later.